Is the US going to be investable in 5 years' time? Oh my.
It's obvious that this industry, space communications, will have room for multiple winners. It's not going to be a winner take all.
I definitely think in like maybe 20 years' time, we're going to look back and think it's weird that we were eating animals, like rearing these things and like ethically horrible and bad for the planet. Plus, not to mention the diseases that get kind of across herds and things like that. So Mosa Meat's approach, and there's multiple companies doing this, is to take a small sample, like cell sample of a cow, and then brew, like culture it and grow cells and essentially grow like a steak, like a chemistry experiment.
This is Wall Street Wildlife. Before we get to this week's show, a short word from our sponsors.
All right. If you're serious about investing, you need to know about public.com. That's where you can invest in everything: stocks, options, bonds, crypto. They even offer some of the highest yields in the industry, like the bond account 6% or higher yield that remains locked in even if the Fed cuts rates.
What sets Public apart is how they give you the tools you need to make informed investment decisions. Their built-in AI tool called Alpha doesn't just tell you if an asset is moving, it tells you why the asset's moving, so you can actually understand what's driving your portfolio performance. Public is a FINRA-registered, SIPC-insured, US-based company with a customer support team that actually cares.
Bottom line, your investments deserve a platform that takes them as seriously as you do. Fund your account in 5 minutes or less at public.com/wildlife and get up to $10,000 when you transfer your old portfolio. That's public.com/wildlife.
Paid for by Public Investing. Full disclosures in podcast description. For an advertising-free version of the show, check out patreon.com/Wall Street Wildlife.
Welcome to the latest episode of Wall Street Wildlife with Christoph and Luke. Oh my God, we've got an interesting discussion today prompted by a tough question from one of our Patreons. Is the US going to be investable in 5 years' time? Oh my. Christoph is also going to give us an update on AST SpaceMobile and tell us why it's better than Starlink. I'm kind of skeptical as a Starlink shareholder. Oh, and I'm going to chat about another private company that I just invested in and I'm really enthusiastic about. And this is one that you guys might be able to invest in too.
Good to see you, Badger.
Good.
You're looking freshly. You got that little dirt off your face, I see. Like back to being handsome and presentable. I'm proud of you. You know, for a little bit. Let me just say, I was, although a big ocean divides us. In theory, had I run into you, I'm not sure I would have been willing to be side by side with rake ruffian like you, with the mud on your face. But now, you know, I'll be seen with you anywhere.
It's I'm happily clean shaven once again. But oh my God, like we started when you got on video, I nearly fell out of my chair. He's back. The beautiful young Christoph is back. If you're not checking us out on YouTube, actually, I will just tell you because my mum watches us on YouTube. And I forwarded a WhatsApp to you, a couple actually, and she said, What's happened to Christoph? He used to be so handsome. What has he done to himself? So that bush has gone. Well done.
Yes, my students did not recognize me. Like when I walked into class, they had to look a couple of times like, who, what?
Well, and we can happily put the beard talk behind us now and focus on the important stuff.
Indeed. So let's start this episode by, first of all, thanking our Patreons over at patreon.com/Wall Street Wildlife. We can't do this without you. And that is one of the main sources of our topics today. Like you said, one of our Patrons asked a really brilliant question. And I don't know when it hit the wire. I think it was Friday, maybe, when we got it. And I spent all weekend really deeply thinking about it and preparing it. So I think in this way, it'll be a little bit unusual. And at that moment, while you were probably out, you were somewhere high on the Alps, right? Parachuting or gliding and outrunning avalanches. I went rogue again and posted a little political poll on our Patreon community asking our members, you know, what do you think about explicit political conversation on a podcast that is dedicated to investing. And we know, right, that politics is tricky. And there's a reason why people say don't discuss political things at the dinner table, because it could kind of blow up and cause severe damage and irreparable harms and break communities apart and all that.
Yeah, I mean, and just on that, like the question came in the DMs because our Patreon, Stephen, was like a little nervous about putting the question out there in the public because it is a big, complex question, and some aspects of let's say frame what his question was and like set up the discussion, because Stephen was saying there's like a ton of stuff happening in the US right now. Maybe it's tipping into an autocracy as opposed to a democracy. Like we're afraid as investors, or we should be afraid about investing in China. And maybe that's turning a little bit, but that's always been, I've had a bunch of Chinese equities. It's always been something that's been a little bit of a concern, like the iron grip that President Xi has over like the whole economy and all companies in China. And what if the US is starting to go in that same direction, led by Trump and perhaps by some of the like tech leaders that are buddied up with him, like particularly Elon Musk? Like maybe we'll be looking at the US in 5-10 years time and saying maybe this is equally uninvestable. So yeah, that's what we want to get into in today's discussion.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. And so backtracking, that's why I posted the poll on Patreon. And it was a little tongue in cheek, but I basically said, hey, are you guys in our community okay with us talking about politics explicitly? And the results were, I think, really, really affirming in the positive sense, meaning that 70% of our members said, quote, voted for the option that was, we're like 100-year-old weathered turtles, having seen it all, and nothing will shock us or surprise us, hit us with the truth. And then another 11% said politics are hard, understanding the other side is hard, beating the market is hard, but doing hard things gets us paid. And 0% voted for basically the option that was like, no, don't talk about politics. So I think that's our mandate that says, yeah, we want to acknowledge that feathers may be ruffled, but that is the way into it, right? We have to be willing to voice our positions and hopefully try to understand more deeply and potentially change our minds depending on shifting narratives. But into the fray we go, Badger.
Yeah, and I had a sort of side conversation about this with one of my friends, Christine, yesterday, and she was like, "Oh, how do you guys prepare for this conversation?" And I said, "Well, like Christoph and I, we generally have like a schedule of things we want to talk about. Maybe we have like a few like beats we want to hit, like we want to talk about this part of the discussion, that part of the discussion, but we got no idea what each other actually think about these topics because we like to have the conversation live. So I kind of got no idea where we're going to end up with this. But let's try and like not be partisan. Let's just try and look at the facts as best we can. And ultimately, there is an investing question at the end of this, which is, well, I suppose it's Stephen's question, like, should we be worried as investors about perhaps being quite overexposed to US companies? So we'll try and navigate our way to that, but it's going to be a bit of a tangly journey, I suspect.
Yes. And so this episode, I think we're preparing for it to have a slightly different flavor than all the other ones, but I think it's warranted. So Badger, this weekend, I made a mind map in preparation for this conversation. And now here's where I want to start. It's a very long way, it is a long and meandering journey towards that ultimate investing question destination. But you know where I want to start? With the sharing with you a television show that I'm watching and have been watching now for, I think it's 3 years. I'm curious if you've seen it or heard about it. As a television aficionado, I always hit the best television series of all time lists. And this show usually makes an appearance in the top 10, 20. It's called The Americans. Have you seen or heard about it?
I've not.
It ran from, I believe, 2013 for 6 seasons. So maybe, I don't know when it ended. Was it 2018, 19, something like that? It couldn't be more timely. It's a show that takes place in the 1980s, early 1980s, in which the two main protagonists, Philip and Elizabeth, are a married couple, but they're KGB, Russian KGB spies living in America, raising their American kids in order to infiltrate the US government. Their neighbor happens to be an FBI agent. And that's the sort of like, that's the windup, right? By the way, first two seasons are very, very slow going and tough. There's just a lot of like spy, like following very complicated threads, yada yada. But oh my goodness, I'm at season 4 and we can't get enough. We're at the next, it's so good. It is so good. Highly recommend it. Here's why I want to talk about that. In the philosophical world, there's a term called ideology, which is, it's not just in the philosophical world. It's a pretty common phrase, wouldn't you say, right? In the regular world. Mm-hmm. But in the philosophical world, it has like a kind of heft to it. It's talking about specific frames with which we see the world. What's fascinating about what you see unfolding on this television show, The Americans, is that when you're with the KGB couple, you understand why they think it's a matter of life and death to do what they do, to do this really difficult job of spying and killing people, because from their point of view, their country depends on it, right? And the world depends on it. When you shift over to the FBI side and all the agents trying to stop the KGB agents, it's the same thing. We must stop these people because the world depends on it. I think that's an important point to really sit with for a little bit. I think we understand it mostly intellectually. Like, sure, there's multiple sides to everything. Fine. But the extent to which people can't sort of see beyond their worldview is a pretty powerful philosophical point. And the show is great because as things get more and more complicated, like how do Russian spies raise American kids? Right? Things get gray, things get messy. And then marriage, what is a marriage? All that kind of fascinating stuff gets talked about. So you begin to see the cracks of ideologies. And I wanted to start this conversation there as an invitation to our listeners to say, okay, you might have a position in this, wherever we get to, right? But first understand, or at least try to acknowledge, that your position is actually a kind of, I wouldn't say prison, that's too drastic, but you really can't see, or it's very hard to see beyond your own horizon.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when I was thinking about this topic over the weekend as well, I was conscious of that. And I think I see like other commentators kind of fragmenting into essentially like left versus right and not seeing the facts clearly. And this is like what's happening in the US right now is a really complicated, nuanced situation. And I think this does demand putting aside your political biases and just saying, like, what is the right thing to do here?
May I offer a slightly annoying professional rhetorical adjustment to something you just said? So my professorial rhetoric hat on. Rhetoric is the study of how people communicate, and it's always a kind of it involves an audience. So there's always a speaker and an audience. It's always, I explain to my students, like a dance. You can't have rhetoric without, call it, multiple parties. Like in the dance, ballroom dance, right? This notion that there are facts in rhetoric is complicated by saying there are no facts, there are only claims, right? Which is another subtle point, but it's different because each side thinks of their own position as factual.
Right.
right? But in the situation where people are dancing, it's more about, I think this is the case, and the other person, therefore I claim. And let's put that also, right? Let's think about that
Yeah,
too. Let's try to get away from, fact, when possible, see if we could use the word claim instead of fact.
there are some facts. I totally agree with your clarification, but there are some facts, like the US is in quite a difficult financial situation today, like many countries, but like the US deficit is big and the US national debt is very, very big, and something needs to be done that hasn't been done up until recently. So it's kind of a fact that, let's put some numbers to it, right? It's a fact that the US national debt is currently $36 trillion and forecasted to grow at maybe like $2 trillion in 2025. And it's a fact that right as of December, just like 2 months ago, it was costing US taxpayers, so like you, $308 billion a year just to maintain the debt, like pay the interest on the debt. And that's 17% of federal spending that's planned for this year. So like, the first 17% of all of your taxes you pay are literally just paying the interest on this massive debt, which is growing anyway.
Right. So I would parse that as, using that same lens, fact versus claim. I would say factual is, yes, we have a debt of whatever the amount is, but it's more of a claim that something needs to be done.
Sure.
Because somebody else might say nothing needs to be done. Right. But okay. So that aside. So the first step I wanted to take in this conversation, to take my own medicine about, the whole ideology thing, is to say that I have, I'm trying to examine what my own lens is in understanding this stuff. So first of all, I think it's kind of interesting. I don't know tell me if you agree in my own self-assessment. First of all, I'm Polish. I was born in Poland, which means that I was surrounded by Germany, Nazi Germany, and Soviet Russia, very ideological wars, right? And I'm an immigrant to the United States. I was naturalized when I was whatever. I became a citizen in 2001. And therefore, in some ways, very natural to me in this sense, when I hear of, call it, authoritarian regimes and, the war in the Ukraine, like Russia invading Ukraine, I have a sympathy against that kind of stuff, right? Naturally. Two, professionally, I studied literature, and in literature departments, you think about questions of how stories are written and what ideas they contain, and you try to unpack all these sort of ideologies, many of which have to do with race, equality, gender stuff, colonialism, all this stuff. But by virtue of doing that, English departments tend to be left leaning. Because that's what we're talking about, right? So by profession, I'm trained in sort of leftist frameworks. And so I think I'm trying to say that there's all that in me on one side, but then in the business world, where I spend so much of my time, a lot of the policies and ideas, I would say, lean more conservative and right leaning, because there's this notion that business is about the bottom line. And I can see a lot of those policies pretty clearly. And I think, to my credit, if I may pat myself on my own shoulders, in the 4 years after Trump's first term, I gave myself my own mandate to study what this other side is saying and thinking, so that I'm not reacting out of a pure ideological framework. So I think I'm coming to the table with I've done a lot of work kind of bouncing, like moving from this side to this side to this side. And I think that's important to be able to do in moments like this. You know, to be able to, in one way, defend like each position from a place not of a straw man argument, but something like that could really be an authentic, true best case of that argument. And I think we could try to do both here.
Sure. And as a non-American, like really truly my only vested interest is like the health of my investments, which are predominantly US equities. And like, I don't want us to destroy the environment just for kind of, it's a dumb thing to do. And I don't really want us to enter into World War III and blow ourselves up. So putting those kind of pretty important things aside, I no longer have like, I previously had like very strong negative feelings about Trump in his first term and despaired when like we got Trump and we got Brexit and like everything seemed to be going to shit. Now, like maybe, I don't know, maybe he's the best option, maybe he's not. I'm less emotionally attached to like the person of Donald Trump. I can laugh at stupidity like Trump coin and Melania coin. And I can focus more, I think, on like the outcomes that we're likely to see. So I feel somewhat, well, whatever the opposite of partisan is, like in the middle.
Yeah, I'm glad. So I think you and I are both trying to do a similar thing. Now, somebody on the left, by the way, a critique of that would be the way to, you know, the worst horrors in the world are by good people kind of just not being alarmed. And as we know, in the case of Germany, the rise of the fascist party, we know that was true. And Hannah Arendt writes about this, the banality of evil. Like, oh, things will be fine, right? So that's the left's critique of our attempt to be sort of less alarmist.
Yeah, there is a ton of alarmistness. Like, I mean, just to see some of the rhetoric from, say, journalists like Scott Galloway. I don't know if you saw some of the things he's been saying over the last few days, and Bernie Sanders, somewhat hysterical commentary about, you know, some of the things that are happening are illegal. We should be arresting, I mean, we're going to focus on Doge for a big part of this conversation, Department of Government Efficiency. I don't know to what extent you think we should go back and just kind of explain what it is and why it is. But essentially, like, people on the left are like the house is on fire. They're up in arms screaming at what's going on and calling for like the employees of Doge to literally be like thrown in jail.
Right. This is a great segue to really one of the last points I wanted to bring forward in this background piece. That as I was thinking through this stuff, there's one example that I thought, oh, damn it, do I need to bring this in? And I think I do. And that's a little bit of a refresher on what happened during COVID. Because it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, please, you know, like I really want to hear your perspective on this. From everything that I understand, there's a almost like perfect one-to-one analogy with what happened during COVID and what might be happening now. And it's this, that at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, anybody that critiqued or found, call it alternative ways of seeing, was pre-Musk ownership of Twitter literally censored and told to, you know, deplatformed and all of that, right? Then during the whole Twitter files saga, Musk gave access to journalists to a lot of the documents and files that were email exchanges between world leading scientists, including Fauci. And we learned there in writing, black and white, that the top authorities were doing things and saying things that differed from what they were saying publicly. That led to the whole loss of trust in institutions and so forth.
Right.
But there's one moment, you know, about this stuff. Like, for example, the one I remembered was when on the left-leaning show, Stephen Colbert, Late Night with Stephen Colbert, they were discussing the origins of the virus at the Wuhan lab, right? And Jon Stewart, who very much is a creature of the left, came on the show and said, wait a second, Stephen, there's reason to doubt the left narrative because it really does seem, based on a lot of these discoveries, that the virus did originate in that lab. And it was, I'm not going to go, this isn't a show about COVID, but Jon Stewart, the person on the left, was saying, hey, you lefties, people on the right aren't necessarily just being conspiratorial. Like, turns out they were actually right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll pause there and say, do you, I have a lot more details about that. I don't think that's the point. When I remind you of that moment, right, that what at first seemed like complete crazy right conspiracy theories ended up being actually true, is that not a lesson to have learned about this stuff, which only happened a couple of years ago? Have we forgotten all that?
Well, I mean, it sort of ties into your original point about like beliefs and claims, and I can see like the motivation for governments to have operated the way they did because they believed that we just had to get a clamp on the virus and we had to take certain steps and get like jabs in arms. And so anything that was kind of counter to that narrative or questioned it was like slammed and shut down, and people were shamed for being like vaccine deniers. They were doing it for what they thought were good reasons. And as it turned out, now we're asking quite complicated questions about that. Now it's in the rearview mirror. So yeah, I think you're right. Like, to some extent, we're in the midst of another totally different kind of crisis, albeit ironically one that's to a large extent caused by the COVID pandemic, because that's what really drove fiscal spending through the roof. Evidently, spending rose 50% between 2019 and 2021. And it was all of the, at the time, like sensible decisions that were taken to keep the economy going, stimulus programs, increase spending, like adjust like taxes and pay like stimmies to people. Like, we probably had to do some of those things, but that's led to like the new crisis, which is this financial crisis that the US is in.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for that backdrop. I think I feel ready to move on, like as far as the background stuff goes.
Yep.
I think in summary, my bow tie is using the COVID example and myself as the main character. I'd say at one point, I thought everybody that wasn't listening to Dr. Fauci was an idiot. And then sometime later, I'm like, oh, the idiots have now proven that, they're the smart ones. And now everybody that naively believed him are the idiots. So everybody's an idiot, and I'm like, oh man.
Yeah.
So let's, hold back that reactionary fervor. I think that's how I want to summarize this. So Badger, you want to take us into the specifics of today's conversation and the points we want to address and talk through?
Yeah, well, I think a good sort of central part of the conversation is the Doge initiative. So maybe we should start with just like, because we've explained the problem, like there's not enough money and we're spending too much money. So one of Trump's angles on Doge, or on addressing this problem, was to create a new government Department of Government Efficiency, somewhat controversially putting Elon Musk in charge of it. We can debate whether that's a good idea or not. And their mission essentially is to cut as much of the wasteful spending as they can. And I think they had an initial target of cutting $2 trillion of spending a year. I think they've revised that down to like $1 trillion. And that's still, that will make a big difference. And if it's a claim that this is like something that should be done, but if you buy into the idea that the national debt is something that should be solved, you do need to do something about that. You do need an initiative like this. There is a ton of controversy about the fact that it's being run by like a private citizen, not an elected person, and maybe the mechanisms that they're taking, and some of the hysteria, just to acknowledge it, is that this is illegal. I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. It probably is illegal, but maybe there's like a gray where it might be illegal, but it might be the right thing to do anyway. That's something I would like to discuss. Maybe let's start with that. Like, what are your views on Doge and what it's trying to do?
Yeah. Well, so this is where I think I have to take this one step at a time and put on multiple pairs of glasses. On the side of, for sure, the left, one of the sources that I trust over the years is this author, Anne Applebaum. She's an expert historian about totalitarian regimes. I have a bunch of her books all about, the gulags and the rise of the Soviet Union and the massacres and the horrific, awful things that happened. This is her new book called Autocracy Incorporated: The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. From that perspective, from a professional historian's perspective, she's seen this playbook over and over and over again, and it maps out quite nicely that people who have immense amounts of power get seduced by the power, and in the end, they are only doing it for themselves. And so here we go again, and it's happening in the United States. And if you think this time it's different, you're naive. That's her perspective.
Yep.
When I'm wearing my Polish immigrant left-leaning glasses, I'm like, oh shit, she's right. Like, why would this time be different? And, in full transparency, I think Trump's character is one of the lowest. I think he's a man of very low level character, to put it bluntly, from my perspective. That doesn't give me comfort at all. Like, Trump coin, Melania coin, grifting, all of that. So when I can't trust a person's character, it seems likely that the same playbook is carrying out. It's being played out. Therefore, the stuff you just mentioned, that they're breaking laws, probably true. And that they're breaking the laws not for the betterment of the world or the country, but because this is what dictators do, that gives me chills.
There is a difference, though. I'm not trying to say this time is different, and I haven't read the book, and I'm certainly not an expert in history at all. But like, the world is quite different now in terms of the level of transparency and communication. And it would be almost impossible now to stop like grassroots information just kind of getting out there and leaking. And then people just kind of know to a greater extent probably than ever before what's going on. And then maybe they're not publishing everything, but there is like a Doge Twitter account, X account, and every day like they're publishing like obviously like the wins and the success stories, but we're seeing, maybe it's like this initiative. Just to state my position, I think this is actually a really good idea, and I'm very supportive of Doge, and I've helped organizations do this kind of thing in the past, like massive cost cutting and cost saving exercises, and like the government have tried to do this in the past and failed because you're just not set up to like change yourself. You do need like an external change agent to come in and then just say, guys, like we're doing it my way, totally different way. I think this is kind of set up in the right ways for success. Now, I'm very concerned about like the risk of bad actions happening, perhaps because of like misaligned incentives and personal objectives of people like Musk and Trump and everybody else who's like an insider in this organization. But if they do like a little bit of corruption, okay, like maybe it's going to happen anyway, but maybe the big picture is still net positive. If you can cut like $1 trillion out of spending, there is so much benefit to the country long term if that can be done. And maybe some of the grift and the stuff is going to happen anyway. So, part and parcel.
That's an interesting point, because in thinking about both sides, each side is calling the other a kleptocracy. Mm-hmm. Kleptocracy is, power, basically when power and politics are melded, and each side with so much power has the undeniable temptation to grift and cheat and corrupt. Yep. But isn't that interesting, though? Just to take a pause, right? The left is saying these are nothing but kleptocrats. And then Musk, I think, actually in one of his tweets used that same exact word with regard to the government agencies that are, being paid for who knows what, right? So, the two fingers pointing at each other. One important thing, it's not much of a tangent, but that I was thrilled by, which I think aligns with your point, is that the CEO of Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, tweeted something like, and this is why all of the government's finances need to go on chain. This is why the crypto industry is basically for. Because if we can get all of the government agencies on chain, that means everything becomes de facto transparent. And I read that. When I read that, I was like, off go my left-leaning glasses, on go my right-leaning glasses, if crypto's right somehow, right? And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. Like, why would I not want full transparency in where my tax dollars go?
Yeah. You don't need blockchain to have transparency, but it's one way. Yeah.
I think I differ with you there. There's probably like gray area, but knowing human nature, I'm like, maybe we don't need it. But at some point, there's going to be, spiders and cockroaches in some shadowy corner. So if we can have it,
Sure.
Why not? But so anyway, so that's an argument I think against myself in that sense, that it's needed.
So I've stated a position, which is, I think this is net positive, even though like some bad things will happen. What's your view?
This is where, I feel a deep sense of ambivalence. That's as genuine as anything I felt in a long time. All the way up. I'll put it this way. I don't trust Trump, but weirdly, I trust Elon. Not weirdly, but maybe because I followed his story for 10 years. And it's hard to articulate this, but if I strip away all his layers and all the, call it crazy talk, I legitimately think he's not about it. He's not doing this for the money per se, even though that's how you keep score, yada, yada. I think he is doing this for, call it, the betterment of the United States and a better space on which businesses can thrive and we could innovate our way out of the debt.
Yeah, look, I look, maybe a nuance on that, because like I kind of don't trust either of them. Trump because he's Trump, like we all know his character pretty much. Elon because he's just almost like an agent of chaos in the way he operates sometimes. But I feel like his incentives are actually broadly aligned with like my incentives for like a better world. So if he does like dubious things, perhaps to enrich himself or support his companies, well, I mean, that suits me because I'm invested in most of them personally, but I like the mission of his companies. So I kind of don't mind a bit of putting your finger on the scales in that way. Obviously, if you're like BYD or like another auto manufacturer or your AST SpaceMobile, maybe you've got other reasons to not like that too much. But I think he's a great person to be doing this, particularly because like what we saw, the way he managed like Twitter X when he took over, and he essentially like, what did he fire? Like 70% of the employees. Like the guy is
80.
freaking ruthless and focused, not just ruthless, but like laser focused on like, what's the real thing we're trying to do, right? Asking that, not like all these other side missions and bullshit. Like, what's the thing we're trying to do? And then just stripping out everything else, focusing on the core important thing. And then, maybe you add back some things later. Like you went a bit too far, you stripped out something, so okay, I've got to add it back, I've got to rehire my HR department, whatever it is, right? And I think that kind of quantum of approach is probably needed when you're dealing with something like this persistent debt issue, because you can't solve it with another approach, really, I don't think.
All right, if you're serious about investing, you need to know about public.com. That's where you can invest in everything: stocks, options, bonds, crypto. You can even earn some of the highest yields in the industry, like the 6% or higher yield you can lock in with a bond account.
Public is a FINRA registered SIPC insured platform that takes your investments as seriously as you do. Fund your account in 5 minutes or less at public.com/wildlife and get up to $10,000 when you transfer your old portfolio. That's public.com/wildlife.
Paid for by Public Investing. Full disclosures in podcast description.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to return us to. Ray Dalio has recently been talking about his new book, Why Countries Go Broke. I have a book of his called The Debt Crisis and, what gets countries in the spiral. And long story short, the solution to some of this stuff requires immediate, fast action that is often painful, but has to be done. Otherwise, right, the United States could go bankrupt. And in that scenario, I think the consequences are as bad as whatever, say, a kleptomaniac grifter might attain, because the world could potentially fall into Great Depression and, like bad zombie stuff. So returning to the premise of this, like, why are we talking about this? We're talking about it because the United States is on the verge of bankruptcy. We need to solve this problem. So in that sense, I am in favor of this initiative ideologically, from the financial side standpoint, and for one more reason. This is what I discovered in my poking around this internet. As an example, as a lead example, did you hear about, all the headlines regarding USAID funding being cut?
Yep.
Right? So for simplicity's sake, let's call it a philanthropic charitable organization that does a lot of good in the world, like sending food and water to hungry people. So from that perspective, like, yes, we need organizations like that and we should support them. However, it also turns out, when you do a little digging, that the USAID has also been publicly acknowledged and documented as a kind of front for the CIA, which helps a country like the United States enter a poor country and then establish their own agendas. Mm-hmm. So now it's not so simple as this is just a pure do-gooder, right? All of a sudden you have all kinds of underlying stuff. When I poked at a lot of these kinds of documents this weekend, you find, or Musk has found by turning over the log and seeing all the roaches, that a bunch of these organizations that were getting a lot of money from the US taxpayers were themselves forms of grifts. Like, I think the main headline was Politico, kind of left-leaning, call it journalistic enterprise that was getting $500 million for 37 recipients. And I think when Musk posts that, everyone's like, what is this? Who are these 37 people? Is this justified? Mm-hmm. And I think from that end, it's obvious that there are many, many, many instances like this.
Yep.
I fully 100% support full transparency. I'm not saying get rid of USAID, right? I am saying let's backtrack, find out what the facts are to I think the appropriate use of that word. What is the money? Where's it going to? And then rebuild from there.
Yeah, and rebuild some of these organizations like in different ways. Like a huge chunk of US spending is on like defense, and for very important reasons. But the way that the government engages with like the primes, like Raytheon and Lockheed and Boeing and all these guys, like it just makes no sense at all. The supplier has no incentive to cut costs, be efficient. In fact, they're incentivized to spend as much money as possible, because then they get like their cost plus. They get like, the more they can spend, the more the cost is of building like the next warfighter or missile or whatever the hell it is. Like the more they spend on that, the more they'll make, because they add on like their percentage, their markup. That's no way to, if you're getting in someone to like renovate your library, right? That's no way to engage
Right.
with a contractor, because, you'll end up with bloody Library of Alexandria behind you, right?
There's a tragic element in all this that I want to name. And here I want to define the word tragic not as call it sad or like, bad things happen and people are sad, but tragic in the sense that in human life, there are moments where bad things happen and there is no quote unquote like justice in either side. And in this sense, there are people I know that I've been talking to who are, call it, on the receiving end of a lot of these Trump Doge initiatives where they're being fired or let go or made to do things that are in their lives now really, really hard or challenging. And because I know these people, I feel for them. They're legitimately good people who are doing good work. They're not in this grifting bucket. They're not frauds. But when you take an agent like Musk and he's saying you just cut and ask questions later, the baby is being thrown out with the bathwater situation. And it makes me think this is one of these hard instances where the problem is so bad that something needs to be done, but the solutions, there are no perfect solutions. So you're going to cause harm one way or another. There is no easy way out, which is tragic, right? I feel like, you know what I'm saying? It's almost like each side ideologically thinks that there is a happy solution if you just don't do this, right? Or if you just behave yourself. I don't think that's the case. This is bad options no matter where you look. And hopefully this is the least bad option, maybe.
Yeah, and just take the pain, swallow the pill, and just get it done. If you set it up in the right way with the right transparency and monitoring, like maybe the US can kind of reinvent its economy, and and be much more stable and predictable for many, many decades to come.
Exactly. So I think we're on the verge of addressing some of Stephen's questions directly, like the upshot. I have one more thing, though, I found, which delighted me to no end, and we'll put this in the show notes. It's a clip of Jon Stewart from 2023. He's on stage at some university, I think, talking to an agent of the Federal Department of, I want to say Defense, but don't quote me on that. Some large federal bureau, right? Oh my God, I watched this like 4 times because it is so instructive into, I think, what we're seeing here. The federal agent is basically lecturing John and this is not a small issue. She's lecturing him aggressively. Like you could tell, tone of her voice. She's like borderline attacking him and saying, John, there's a difference between auditing and waste, right? And she's defending the US government in 2023, right? And Jon Stewart's reply is, when things go unaudited, that's how I would define waste. So it is a definitional argument, but to Jon Stewart's great credit, the way he replies to her is so much more humane. And he's a professional, right? I mean, he's so good at what he does. But to me, the way you respond to these things matters. And I think Stewart is right in this particular case. If you don't audit things and you don't know what things are, how can you, with a straight face, say that's not wasteful? So I implore all of our viewers, listeners, to check out our show notes to watch this clip. It's like 3 minutes long. To me, it encapsulates the whole thing, really. Stridency versus call it, let's talk about this. Let's be humane to each other. And this is, from 2003. So this is a year in advance.
I don't know if you want to go here with the conversation, because I think we're sort of aligning around this is actually probably the right thing to do. What's your feelings as a US citizen that actually this is unconstitutional? That this is actually, I don't know, but it seems like the claims, plausible claims, are that this is an overreach of power to use an executive action in this particular way, and really budget spending is approved by Congress. So if you wanted to do something like Doge, great, but it has to be from Congress, not from Trump and Musk like buddying up and just cracking on with it.
I think I agree with that. And it's been a while since I've done my US history. But at some point, I was pretty clear that the United States, the strength of its government is the checks and balances system.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to prevent somebody like Musk, who is the world's richest man, to basically do whatever he wants, when obviously he has a stake. And let's not be naive, right? He's running Tesla and SpaceX and 5 other companies. He wants as few rules, and he wants to be able to do basically whatever he wants for the betterment of his own businesses. I'm not denying that.
Mm-hmm.
So it does seem legitimately dangerous that one individual could have this much of an effect. One motivated individual could have this much effect where all of a sudden, because of his call it leanings and desires, thousands and thousands of jobs in federal departments are being closed. As far as I could tell, the U.S. Department of Education has been closed as of this morning. Maybe that was a fake article. I didn't read into it, but that's massive, right? So no, that's approaching what, monarchy? I mean, or some version of. So no, I think it's right, unconstitutional,
But
probably highly illegal.
But what if, like, if you stuck with the Constitution and you waited for Congress to have an opinion on this and do things in the right way, like, chances are it just wouldn't happen, and it wouldn't happen to the same extent. And I think where we navigated to like 15 minutes ago was, this is the right thing to do. So is it, like, how do you feel about the fact that this is probably illegal, but we should probably do it anyway? Like, it feels a bit like, just to sort of say, like, it feels a bit like a case of, like, just do it and then, like, ask for forgiveness afterwards.
I'm going to give you my intuitive answer. Mm-hmm. This is the one that I'm legitimately, like, sitting with, despite my ability to reason both sides. Yeah. I think this is overall a good thing.
Okay.
So I think we align there. With real fingers crossed that it does in fact not deteriorate to maniacal egomaniacs actually imposing some crazy fascist thing, and that democracy as we knew it crumbles, and this is a new system brought in that's somehow dangerous and worse than what we have.
And that prompts a question I haven't thought about, actually. Like, how would we know? When would we know? And what could we look at to try and get a sense of the extent to which it's becoming, like, no longer like a good set of activities to cut costs and drive efficiencies, and it's now starting to step more and more into like an authoritarian China-style governance, and essentially like ignoring the Constitution?
Well, here's one example I thought of, to use the Department of U.S. Education as the case study. Mm-hmm. As a professional educator, I could make an argument that that's a wasteful department.
Okay.
So let's say I side with Musk, right? But we need schools, right? You can't just abandon kids. So let's say our focus on what happens with that story. Let's say that department is cut. Okay, we save money, good. But then the question is, to tracking it, what is the next step? What replaces that? What happens to the test scores? In other words, is the billionaire saving a lot of money by closing down a bunch of schools and the kids are there to fend for themselves? Or at some point, does the billionaire say, okay, we got rid of the rot, but now we're going to engineer our way to something better? And look, the test scores 5 years from now are higher. That's what I would look for in all the different iterations of this. Like, what is replacing the previous structure? And this is why maybe the tandem of Musk and Trump is somehow better than if it was one of the two. Like, Trump, if it was just Trump, I wouldn't believe it for a second. But I think Elon could actually implement the next phase, because he's a builder.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly he's done this before. Maybe not at this scale and this complexity, but he's done this multiple times in his companies. So I buy that. Like he's probably among the best people to be doing this. No argument. And something he'll do, which is interesting, into the example you gave. Like, I don't know anything about the US education system, and I'm not an educator, but he'll probably drive people to focus on like the true desirable outcome, which in the case of education isn't actually test scores, right? Because test scores are, it's like the whole, I don't want to diss your industry, but it's set up badly, right? It's just rewarding people for rote memorization, not the ability to actually think and operate and navigate in the world. And maybe, if you are going to reinvent education, maybe you should start from that position. Like, what is it we're actually trying to do?
Exactly. I talk about this stuff all the time in my classes. I'm saying, look, young ladies and gentlemen, AI is here. A paradigm shift is absolutely necessary. You cannot approach your education in the same way anymore. And my true feeling is that were they, say, something like the US Department of Education to stay exactly as it were, it's like a dinosaur walking with a meteorite, like coming closer and closer. So this kind of like tear it down because it's dead anyway approach, I think, is correct. And so it gives more of a chance for the new thing that needs to be born to actually be born.
Yeah.
And we could check that, right? And that's why, my thesis here would be, if we do use blockchains more often going forward, then these kinds of things could be more easily traced, like school performances or whatever the new thing is. So that's not just politicians saying fake things and everybody buying it, but we could track whatever metrics we need to.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, let's not turn it into a blockchain argument, because that's like a whole nother layer of potential like controversy and complexity. But yeah, like I agree with transparency. And, and sure, like there are some agencies that have to, by definition, have like an element of secrecy, but you want some checks and balances, so that, if they do have some element of opaque spending, it's at least like proportionate to like their mission. They're not just like wildly like funding all sorts of like wars overseas and strange things.
Right. So are we at the point, Badger, that we could address Stephen's question directly? Is the US on its way to becoming uninvestable? What do you think?
I really like this. And I think the US, I think the US could become uninvestable if it doesn't do something like this. As you said, there is certainly precedent for the US defaulting its debt obligations. And that would be very bad. Like, that's happened in the past. And if that were to happen again, that would be very, very bad. Let's just say, ruthlessly as investors, that would be really unequivocally bad for investors. Whether you're invested in the US or overseas, right? The US is so fundamental to the world's economy. So I think this is net positive, and I'm glad this is happening. And I don't think this is going to make the US uninvestable.
I agree with you. And I think my only counter to that would be if I put on my left glasses and say, as I said before, if history does repeat, and this time is no different, then we actually know historically that regimes that are authoritarian in this way make for very, very bad economics.
Yep.
The Soviet Union, and I'm not, all the ways that oligarchs and these kinds of kleptocracies have ruled in the past. It seems on paper that they would work, but in the end, the power corrupts too much. If that's the case, then I think the US is in bad shape. But probabilistically, I want to say that won't be the outcome at this stage. The better of the two bad options. So I think I'm siding with you.
Yeah, I'd maybe even go a little bit further than that and say, like, the bad stuff we're acknowledging is going to happen whether or not we're doing things like Doge. So, and I just kind of, at this stage, I just kind of shrug my shoulders a bit and accept that, like, grifter's going to grift. I fear, like when I had this conversation with my friend Christine yesterday, like I fear we're going in a totally different direction here. We can shut this down if you like. The overturning of Roe versus Wade, and now I'm not fully up to date on the latest news, but like now the power is in the hand of the states, and now it's sort of becoming illegal to have an abortion in some states. I think that might be true. And if you cross state lines to have an abortion, like the doctors can be prosecuted, you can be prosecuted. So you've got something there that I think is like fundamental to sort of human rights, women's rights. And I fear that, if things like Doge were used as a lever to further some of those like political goals that are nothing to do with cost and efficiency, like that would be a very bad outcome. But I suppose in the round, like I'm accepting some of this shit's going to happen anyway, and we have to find a way to solve those problems and shine a light on them and try and stay somewhat balanced. But we got to make the cost savings at the same time.
I think that's fair. I don't think I have too much to add to that. That's a fair thing to keep an eye on. The only thing to add, and this is way above the scope of this conversation, is that in political theory, you have to remember that not everybody assumes that, for example, liberalism, defined as equal rights for everybody, is the best system. And there's lots of legitimately decent, reasonable reasons for that. But that takes us too far. So I think that the upshot is that human beings are messy, and we have not figured out any perfect system of organizing ourselves. And each system comes with lots of problems, and we're still evolving. And maybe, last point. It's like when I was listening to Anna Applebaum talk about this, she's right. She's assuming that by definition, because they're undermining the current system, that's bad. But again, from the innovator's standpoint, maybe a new system needs to be born, and this is the messy way it has a chance at being born.
Yeah.
So,
well,
okay.
Stephen, hope you're satisfied, and I hope I haven't put off too many of our viewers with that conversation.
What's the TLDR? Right, Stephen, don't worry about it. Here's what you do, Stephen. I got you. I got your back. Monkey's got your back. Don't worry about it. Get yourself a glass, fill it with ice cubes, and in that glass, pour 1 part vermouth, 1 part Campari, and 1 part rum. Stir it up, and you're going to have the best Negroni of your life. That's the TLDR.
Christoph's pulling my chain because you do not make a Negroni with rum. You make it with gin, and you cannot mess with a classic. I had a take on an espresso martini the other day. Bullshit. Do not mess with the classics. They're classics for a reason.
Right. And if you want to know what's up with that, check out our Patreon community. So shall we turn to what? A little bit of stock talk?
Yeah. Like I think we're not ready to have this full conversation, but you are an AST SpaceMobile investor. I'm a Starlink investor. And all you guys are telling me my Starlink technology is shit. And I don't believe you. So can you explain what's going on here?
Sure. So, okay, right. This is not the big deep dive that I'm going to do in some future date. But right now, ASTS, I believe in King of the Jungle portfolio, is my number 2. No, 2 or 3. It's EOS and then I think ASTS or Relay. So I have a lot of stake in this horse. Last night during the Super Bowl. And then the thing happened. Here's what happened. Last night during the Super Bowl, T-Mobile released a commercial basically saying that they are ready to give internet connectivity in a beta testing format to Starlink phones now. And that basically all carriers could kind of opt into this somehow. So this was news. This was a major announcement. and that they're going to charge, I believe it was $15 or $20 per subscription to add this kind of connectivity. One way of understanding this is that in the old parlance, shots have been fired. This has, in the most public event in the United States, the race is on. The gun's been fired, right? We're starting the race. What's important to understand is that T-Mobile is the one major partner that Starlink has. Yep. ASTS is partnered with basically everybody else, to keep it simple. Verizon, AT&T, and Vodafone, and lots of the big European players. From one perspective, before the market opened today, people were like, oh, Starlink is pretty good technologically wise, maybe better than we thought. And they were already basically getting after it. They already have satellites up in space. And so they have this first mover advantage. So ASTS stock is going to tank today. That was one theory. But another theory, the one I subscribe to, is that ASTS has the better technology by far, because it's already been proven. In fact, last week, using the one satellite that ASTS has, they were able to do video to a device. Whereas Starlink technology, sometimes the text messages work, sometimes they don't. The ASTS bulls were saying, wow, you're starting at $20 for subscription? We were thinking more along the lines of $5, $10. So that basically, in theory, doubled whatever future revenue ASTS might have. At this moment, Badger, as we're recording, the ASTS stock is up 23%. Working backwards, this tells me what the market is saying is it's obvious that this industry, space communications, will have room for multiple winners. It's not going to be a winner take all. And if in fact the starting price for this service is $20 a month and not $5 or $10, then the revenues that both companies will have will be way, way, way bigger than we even thought. But on top of that, I have one more surprise for you. You're going to love this. Because in our own private banter, right, as I'm kind of sending you some snippets about ASTS being the superior investment and all that, and some of our patrons are, hawks about this. We're pretty active on this stuff now. Your response to me has been basically what I would expect from a Starlink shareholder. Like, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, correct.
Well, tell me what happens when I tell you that the CEO of a company called Anduril is an ASTS investor, which he made public basically yesterday. How does that make you feel?
I'm cool with that. Lucky's a smart guy. I'd be surprised if he's not a SpaceX shareholder as well.
That's a good follow-up. But my understanding of the exchange was that, as somebody who is interested in more about Anduril better than I do, but it's like, call it the future, defense technology company, that he's investing in ASTS because he sees that form of technology as the one to better pair with his future, defensive ambitions for his own company.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think that's necessarily meaningful. Like, I just see, like, it's so early at this stuff. I don't want SpaceX to be the only game in town. I want there to be multiple games. Otherwise, it's just like the next frontier for antitrust, and that's just bad for everybody. So, like, hoorah. I just don't, I don't feel that ASTS have much of a leg to stand on compared to just the whole business model of SpaceX, which is why I'm like Starlink bull. But if you can tell me in a future episode why Starlink's technology is shit, like, I'd like to understand that, because I didn't think that was the case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not only that, but also the business model for ASTS is, I think, the superior one. But that's for the deep dive. The only issue right now really as a preview with ASTS is that they're pre-revenue, and they're not going to get their satellites up for another few launches, but they also have $1 billion in cash now. So, but anyway, that's a whole side gig. I think the TLDR here is that as of yesterday's Super Bowl announcement, these two companies are now officially going at it, and there are lots of smart people that are backing ASTS despite the claims being made by Starlink and T-Mobile.
Sure.
And my take is think of it as room enough for both, but I'm going to back what I consider the superior technology, and I'm enjoying the 23% bump in the ASTS share price this morning.
Great stuff. All right. Shall I tell you about a pre-revenue company I've just invested in?
Yes. yes. Tell me, is it going to be more sausages?
Good point. Yeah, sort of. Like we talked about Greg's vegan sausage rolls last week. You're right. I didn't realize I've got like a food theme. Bloody hell.
From fintech to sausages, the Badger way.
Yeah. So this is another food company. Yeah, exactly. So it's a startup you might have heard of because they were one of the OG companies in cultured meat. So this is Mosa Meat, and they're raising money again. So there's a private round open, and they're actually raising money on a couple of like crowdfunding platforms. This is actually one that anyone can get a little bit a piece of. They're raising with Crowdcube in the UK, which is who I'm using, and the fees seem reasonable. So, like, who are Mosa Meat and what are they doing? They're trying to help solve like the problem of like the whole ethics around animals. I definitely feel like we're going to look back in 20 years time, a bit like I've said this before, like when we look back at the wearing of seatbelts in cars, and it just seems like just a ridiculous thing to not wear a seatbelt when you're driving a vehicle. But like 20, 30 years ago, like most people probably didn't, and it probably felt a bit weird to put a seatbelt on. Like the culture changed. I definitely think in like maybe 20 years time, we're going to look back and think holy fuck, it's weird that we were eating animals, like rearing these things and like ethically horrible and bad for the planet. Plus, not to mention just like, the diseases that get kind of across herds and things like that. So Mosa Meat's approach, and there's multiple companies doing this, is to take a small sample, like cell sample of a cow, and then culture it and grow cells and essentially grow like a steak in a vat, like a chemistry experiment. They've been doing this for a bunch of time, and they're now raising money to accelerate R&D because they want to start getting their products into restaurants because the price of this stuff has come down. It's becoming more technically feasible. And this is just going to, I feel like this is definitely the way the world is going. All of that shit with like Beyond Meat and Impossible, like they were good products, but they've become like highly commoditized. I was a Beyond Meat shareholder. I love the idea of like plant-based protein, but really that's not going to solve the problem because if someone's a carnivore, right, they want meat. Like you Americans, you love your meat. It kind of makes me laugh that like there's so much lobbying against cultured meat because like the end is in sight for like the US cattle industry. And I think that's a good thing, right? Obviously, a bit like our conversation at the top of the conversation, like people are going to suffer, things are going to change, but this is the nature of progress. So anyway, I'm a Mosa Meat shareholder, and I'm not saying go invest in this one, do your own due diligence, but you can be too if you jump in on this round, which is open right now.
Oh, I love this one. I'm teaching a class this semester, The Rhetoric of Animals. So this is stuff that I teach about directly. It's something I care about as an individual. I think the torture of animals, which is the predominant way animals are treated, is one of the most horrific things that humans are doing at the moment. So any company that is addressing this is amazing. I really hope that you can provide for us in the show notes the link or several links to how we could find this company, and I will definitely check it out.
Great stuff.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Alrighty. Well, I think that brings us to the back of a big ass episode.
Yeah, boy. What did we accomplish? We solved the world's problems. We freed the animals. We explored space. We also reminded viewers how to drink their Negronis. So, yeah. Great job, Badger. But maybe most importantly, as we end all shows, let's extend a little bit of gratitude to some new Patreons. Tule, VJ, and Matthew S. Thank you so much for your support. Welcome to the tribe. Find us, for the rest of you who have not yet joined, at patreon.com/Wall Street Wildlife. It's a hopping, lively place where we discuss stocks and all kinds of other to-dos.
And we got like a bunch of different Patreon tiers. We have just announced last week a new tier because we nearly got merch. Like you can see I'm wearing like some random Badger t-shirt that I bought off Amazon, and Christoph's got like a range of animal themed hats. We do have like an actual fancy Wall Street Wildlife logo. If you want one of those logos on a mug or a t-shirt or some other bit of like stuff you want to wave around and show your support for the show, then if you go join up at our our jungle cat tier, then we will soon have merch. It's not quite ready yet.
Yeah, I have a couple of prototypes of those mugs, which I gave my folks for Christmas, and man, are those banging looking mugs. That's some fine design right there. Can't wait to get them made in quantity for all our jungle cats.
Very good. All right, well, Christoph, we end all our episodes with that big question. Are you ready to become a beast of an investor?
Your journey starts right here.
A reminder that the people on this program may hold positions in the companies that are mentioned. Buying and selling stock carries financial risk, which could include loss of capital. The views in this program should not be taken as personalized advice. Before acting on any of the information provided, listeners are encouraged to consult a financial or tax professional.